to say, South Africa, send me.
Welcome back. The Executive Director at the Centre for Development and Enterprise, Bernstein, says government should stop talking about a plethora of new projects and hone in on a direct programme of action to kickstart the economy. Well, on the eve of President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address, and Bernstein joins us now. And good evening to you. We've become quite used to announcements during the State of the Nation address of many different projects, scores of them in some cases. You're suggesting we should change that?
Well, Stephen, last year I was able to host an important workshop. About 35 people, the most senior people from the government working on the infrastructure program, from the presidency downwards, and the biggest lenders of financial capital in South Africa. And we talked about why the infrastructure program isn't delivering. And the results are quite surprising. Firstly, although there's been enormous talk about big projects, 276, 72, 50, the man in charge of Infrastructure South Africa says he is focused on 50 projects, but they are not yet ready to go to market, and that in his view, this will take a long time. Now, what is going on here? The private sector is ready to invest in bankable projects, but no projects are coming to market. So we tried to unravel what the problems were, and I think there are issues on both sides. The government has to change the regulations that will enable public-private partnerships to take place quickly and effectively. This has not happened, and it's taking a very long time, and it's quite hard to understand why, if the president is determined to get infrastructure in the ground, this is not being fast-tracked. Another area of, I think, confusion in the state concerns what you might call the criminal element. There are construction mafias that come along when a project is taking place, and they demand jobs, they demand money, protection money, otherwise they'll vandalize things. And unless we say clearly, this has got nothing to do with community development, these are criminal elements, and it's time that the law took its course. We also need to protect existing infrastructure where the law is not coming into effect and people are destroying infrastructure. So there are a lot of problems and not enough clarity in the state that they really have been decimated by state capture, very weak indeed, corrupt. Corruption is rife, and they should choose, according to the private sector, they should choose 3 or 4, maybe 4 or 5 big projects. And together they could work on getting those done. And this would be a big signal if this could happen. So a very different approach is required. And I think it's true to say the private sector needs to be much sharper and clearer on the conditions that have to be met before they will bring investment to the table.
So I suppose what you're saying is, if we have 4 or 5 things that we can focus on, we can have a laser-like focus, a laser-sharp focus on what we're doing, maybe even weekly updates through some sort of mechanism to the public, to the presidency, through the presidency, of what's happening on each of those projects, that'll actually get things going. It's about focus.
I think there are 2 things, Stephen, exactly what you're saying. It's about focus on 4 or 5 projects and what needs to be done to get private sector investment and to manage that investment properly. The other is we talk much too much about projects. We should talk a lot more about the reforms that would result in considerable private investment. If you allow private investment in our ports, in our railways, in our roads, if you take the big decisions that need to be taken to allow for third-party operators to come in and invest and be sure they will get returns, you don't have to talk so much about projects. The private sector will start making it happen, as we hope it's starting to happen with 100-megawatt self-generation. But look how long that took. So it's a sense of urgency, it's a sense of focus, and it's a dual approach. Policy reform will get us investment in key areas of infrastructure vital for future investment, and we should pick 4 or 5 projects and get serious about this and do it with speed.
Is there still a relationship of trust between business and the private sector and government? I mean, I would imagine some people are very frustrated. When you have frustration on both sides, it can lead to a very difficult relationship.
I think it's a complex relationship. On the one hand, there were lots of indications of goodwill and everyone saying things are better, and the private sector seconded people to help with the infrastructure program in the state. But, you know, when you say exactly what are they doing, I couldn't get an answer. I'm not clear on that. And I think it's sort of goodwill, but it hasn't translated into an actual program. There is no doubt there is growing frustration. Investors are saying there is interest, but people are going to move on very quickly from trying to invest in South Africa in infrastructure. And I think at a bigger level, there is also concern that we get far too much talk, promises, but actually very little delivery. And the country doesn't seem to move forward in a significant way that you could say we're arresting the sense of decline I think all of us have.
We do need the economy to grow. Are you expecting any big announcements from the President tomorrow? Do you expect him to focus on what you've been talking about? Or are you perhaps more worried, and I'm afraid to say this, there's a lot of cynicism around the State of the Nation address, which I think is an indication of where we are. Are you expecting just more of the same tomorrow?
Let me put it to you this way. I have no knowledge of what's going to be in the speech tomorrow. What I am looking for is a president that says, I recognize the very serious situation the country is in, not only the fiscal crisis, the unemployment crisis where we are the worst in the world, the stagnant economic growth, but the fact that there are armed insurrectionaries running around and we haven't apprehended them. I want a diagnosis that is realistic and talks to all of us citizens in the despair that we feel that this country is in decline. Secondly, I need bold actions announced that indicate the president is concentrating on the national interest and not how to keep his political party together. We have to take some actions. There are members of the cabinet who don't believe in the Constitution, and there are others who are incompetent, if not corrupt. And all the way down in government, we have to not only talk about bold policy moves, but we have to talk about people as well. I don't have confidence in this cabinet. I'm reading the report that was released this week about security and the July events last year, and it is a report of failure from the top down to secure property and people's lives that resulted in the terrible events last year, and that everyone's saying could happen again.
And Bernstein from the Centre for Development and Enterprise, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Well, an update on the other big story today, the health MEC in Gauteng, Dr. Nomathemba Moeketsi, is visiting the family